My parents turned against me and tried to take my makeup brand by claiming I stole from them, until my childhood friend laughed and said, "Wait, you mean the brand she created in our dorm room?" After my parents disowned me for not joining the family business, I built a successful makeup brand from scratch with my college roommate. Years later, they came back trying to claim they helped build it and sued me for control. Just when I thought I was drowning in legal stress, my old college roommate came through with receipts, literally, and shut them down in the most satisfying way. "You're telling me they think they came up with Allegro Beauty?" Junie asked, her voice echoing through my small kitchen. "They're saying I used their ideas, their influence, and somehow their resources." Even though they cut me off before college, I replied, watching the kettle begin to steam. Junie leaned back in the kitchen chair, arms crossed, her expression somewhere between incredulous and furious. "Well, that's funny," she said. "Because I distinctly remember them not sending you a dime. Also, I still have the notebook where you wrote your first formula with a $4 Walgreens blush and cocoa butter." I smiled faintly. But it didn't touch the fatigue in my bones. That was the night I realized I wasn't going to fight this alone. It started with a phone call. A weird, awkward, sterile kind of phone call that makes your gut twist before anyone even says a word. My father, Raymond, called after almost 15 years of radio silence. I was in my studio, packing a new shipment to a boutique in New York, when the call came through. I stared at the screen. The number wasn't saved, but I recognized the area code. And somehow, I just knew. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Callista," he said, like we had just spoken last week, not nearly a decade and a half ago. "I didn't expect to hear from you," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "We need to talk," he said, cutting straight to it. "About what you owe us." It felt like a joke. But he wasn't laughing. Neither was I. Growing up in the suburbs of Chicago, my life was mapped out before I had a say. My parents were the kind of people who believed in image over substance, discipline over dreams. My brother Devin followed their blueprint perfectly: business degree, golf on Sundays, wife with a perfect smile and a Pinterest-worthy home. He even had a spot in my dad's accounting firm waiting for him before graduation. Me? I liked making things. Playing piano. Drawing. Mixing skincare out of oatmeal and avocado when I was 13, testing colors on the back of my hand until my mother made me scrub it off before church. When I told them I wanted to study product chemistry and pursue a career in beauty, my father said, "We're not paying for clown school." My mother cried. Devin called it embarrassing. They cut me off that same year. It was cruel at first. I moved to Arizona State with nothing but scholarship money, a waitress job I found through Craigslist, and a lot of sheer stubbornness. That's where I met Juniper Klein, my randomly assigned freshman roommate and probably the reason I didn't completely lose my mind that first year. Junie was wild, creative, and direct. She didn't believe in limits. She saw me tinkering with lip gloss formulas on our shared desk and said, "Why not sell this stuff?" I laughed. But she didn't. She helped me set up an Etsy shop, took photos on her old DSLR, even convinced a local YouTuber to try out my foundation sample for a freebie. It started in that dorm room. That tiny, fluorescent lit box of a room where we mixed pigments with coffee stirrers and poured serum into sample tubes with plastic droppers. We printed our own labels on sticker paper and cut them out by hand. We named the brand Allegro Beauty, my idea, because the word meant joyful in music, and I hadn't felt joyful in years until that moment. I'd never felt more alive than I did building something from nothing. We graduated. Junie took a marketing job in LA, and I moved to Santa Fe where the light and quiet suited me. I rented a small studio space, hired my first assistant, and slowly grew the brand into something sustainable. Not viral. Not flashy. But real. We focused on inclusivity, clean ingredients, soft colors, and community. And then, like a ghost with impeccable timing, my parents returned. When the legal documents arrived, I almost dropped my coffee. They were suing me. The claim? That Allegro Beauty was a joint family concept. That my mother had contributed product ideas during my teen years. That my father had offered financial insight and business mentorship. And that I had illegally launched the brand without compensating them. They wanted half the company. Not an apology. Not even a meeting. Just half. And they came armed. My brother Devin had joined forces, signing affidavits saying I had benefited from years of financial support that should entitle my parents to partial ownership of any ventures thereafter. I was stunned. Speechless, even. For days, I couldn't eat. I couldn't focus. Every ding of my inbox made me flinch. I called Junie that night, voice shaking. She flew in the next day. I had been smart. Not because I thought this would happen, I hadn't, but because I'm naturally cautious. I had kept all my early files, notes, documents. But Junie had gone above and beyond. She had notebooks, screenshots, and emails. She had a thumb drive with hundreds of photos from our dorm years, us mixing product samples, brainstorming names, trying out disastrous branding ideas. She even had an audio clip of us giggling about a foundation color match and shouting Allegro when we finally nailed it. Date stamped. Geotagged. Ironclad. My lawyer, Claudia, a no-nonsense litigator from Albuquerque, took one look and said, "This is going to be fun." But I wasn't having fun. I was exhausted. Every time I thought about how far I'd come, I saw their names dragging me backward. The betrayal wasn't in the lawsuit. It was in the fact that they watched me suffer, then waited for me to succeed before trying to claim it. We filed a motion to dismiss. My team pulled together every contract, receipt, and product log. Claudia prepped me for depositions. My hands shook through the entire first one. But Junie? She was a force of nature. She walked into the deposition room in downtown Chicago like it was a casual meeting. Hair in a high ponytail. A flash drive in one hand. She greeted my parents like she barely remembered them. "Hi, Mr. and Mrs. Marin. Still pretending you were supportive?" I swear my mother flinched. It was the moment Junie leaned forward, smiled sweetly, and said, "Wait, you mean the brand she created in our dorm room," that everything shifted. She had cornered them. They had no evidence. No records. No receipts. Just pride and assumption. Their case began to disintegrate. They tried to negotiate privately after that. "Let's talk settlement," their lawyer said. We said no. "You don't get to bury me and then dig me up just because you smell money." We pushed for dismissal. The judge ruled in our favor. They walked away with nothing. Not even dignity. The day the ruling came down, I didn't cry. People expect some big emotional outburst after a legal victory like that. But for me, it was quiet. Still. Like I'd been holding my breath for years and had finally exhaled. There was no gloating, no celebration. Just relief and a bitter sort of calm. I walked out of that courthouse beside Junie and Claudia, listening to the shuffle of shoes echo down the marble hall. Junie said nothing at first. She just looked over and squeezed my arm. "You were never alone," she said. That was it. And that was enough. But the damage, the emotional fallout, didn't disappear just because a judge said I was right. The lawsuit hadn't stayed private. Someone had leaked the story to a local Chicago business blog, probably from Devin's side. It trickled into beauty forums and indie brand discussion threads. Nothing went viral, but it was enough to leave a stain. Enough that I found myself checking Instagram at 2 a.m., heart pounding whenever I saw my brand name next to the word controversy. Some comments were kind. Others were cruel. Another founder lying about a bootstrap story. "I bet her rich parents funded the whole thing." Classic. Cut the family out after she made it big. She's lying. No one builds a business on a dorm room budget. That's PR spin. It hurt more than I expected. Not just because it was false, but because it chipped away at something sacred, my independence. My story. The one thing I had fought tooth and nail to preserve. I thought about releasing a public statement. Junie wanted me to. You should say something. Set the record straight, she argued, pacing my studio. But I didn't want to drag the fight into the public square. I didn't want to hand people more drama to chew on. Instead, I focused inward. We started documenting everything. The timeline. The receipts. The early footage. We created a behind-the-scenes series for Allegro's website, not some glossy ad, just us telling the story honestly. Me and Junie, sitting in that same tiny desk from our dorm room that we'd somehow kept all these years. Laughing at our mistakes. Crying a little too, because it still stung. And that's when something strange happened. Customers, real, long-time ones, started writing in. Not just to support the brand, but to thank us. I started using Allegro when I was going through chemo. It was the only foundation that didn't irritate my skin. My daughter with albinism finally found a shade match. She carries it everywhere. I lost everything during COVID. Allegro's blush was the one thing that made me feel human again. That's when I remembered why I did this in the first place. Not for revenge. Not for money. Not even for my parents' approval, which I realized I hadn't wanted in a long time. I did it because makeup gave me something when the world gave me nothing. And I wanted other people to feel that too. The funny part was, or maybe sad is the better word, my parents still didn't reach out after the case ended. No apology. No explanation. Just silence. Devin did, though. He sent an email. Short. Stiff. Formal, in that corporate robot tone he'd perfected. I regret the direction things took. I hope we can have a conversation when you're ready. I stared at the screen for a long time. I didn't respond. Not because I wanted to punish him, but because I genuinely had nothing to say. The last time we spoke, he accused me of exaggerating the past, as if being cut off and disowned was something I'd invented for drama. Some bridges, once burned, shouldn't be rebuilt. Not for nostalgia. Not for peace. Just left behind. Meanwhile, the brand began to heal and grow. Sales rebounded. Old customers returned. New ones came in through word of mouth. Junie helped overhaul the website with her signature sass, and we launched a new line called Rooted, a subtle nod to the chaos of the past year. Earth tones, warm neutrals, and a campaign focused on stories of resilience. We didn't mention the lawsuit in the marketing, but we didn't hide either. I gave one podcast interview, just one, where I told the story plainly. No spin. No villainizing. Just facts. The host, a quiet woman in her 50s, ended the episode by saying, "You turned a wound into a window." That's rare. That line stuck with me. Because the truth is, I'll probably always carry this wound. What my parents did didn't just threaten my livelihood, it shattered the little pieces of trust one had left in them. It made me realize that some people, even family, are only comfortable with your success if they believe they can control it. They didn't want me to fail. They wanted me to succeed on their terms. When I didn't, they turned on me. But the story doesn't end there. Because rebuilding isn't just about business or money, it's about self. And in the weeks that followed, I began quietly reclaiming pieces of myself I had buried over the years. I started playing piano again. Not for performance, just for me. I hadn't touched it since I left home. But something about those warm, imperfect notes filled a gap I didn't realize was still aching. I began writing, not for branding, not for press releases, but for healing. Journaling. Morning pages. Letters I'd never send. One to my mother. One to my younger self. And, surprisingly, I reached out to people I had distanced myself from, old friends from college, distant cousins who had fallen away in the years when I thought I had to prove myself through work alone. I even reconnected with Maya, my high school best friend who had tried to warn me years ago. "You know they're never going to accept you for who you are, right?" she had said back then. She was right. And I finally told her so. Junie stayed in Santa Fe for a while after the case. What was supposed to be a long weekend turned into 6 weeks. We worked, we drank too much coffee, we stayed up late watching reruns of Frasier and coming up with ridiculous product names. Call this one emotional baggage, she joked, holding up a smoky eyeshadow. I laughed until I cried. She reminded me of who I was when this all began, a scared girl with big dreams, living off bagels and stubbornness. And now? I was still stubborn. Still dreaming. But stronger. One afternoon, a few weeks after everything settled down, I walked into the studio to find Junie halfway up a stepladder, sticking yellow post-it notes to the ceiling. "What are you doing?" I asked, blinking at the bizarre sight. "Vision board," she said, not even looking down. "Except vertical. We're thinking bigger this year." I laughed. "That's not a vision board. That's chaos." She climbed down, proud of herself, and handed me one of the notes. It read, "Allegro, from dorm room dreams to department store shelves." We hadn't talked seriously about expansion yet. After the lawsuit, I'd been hesitant to think too far ahead. But Junie was right, we couldn't let fear shrink what we'd built. And if nothing else, the past year has taught me that you can't predict what's coming, but you can be ready for it. So we started planning. We weren't selling out. Not to a megacorp. That was never going to be the path. But we started approaching boutiques in Denver, Portland, Austin, places that aligned with our values. Junie handled the pitch decks, and I worked on new formulations. Our team grew by 3. Small steps, but real ones. There was a subtle satisfaction in it all. Not the loud, flashy kind, no confetti or ribbon cuttings, just the steady hum of building something that couldn't be taken away. Around that same time, something strange started happening on social media. A small but persistent group of followers began sharing their own stories, about being cut off by family, about being accused of stealing success, about rebuilding without apologies. They weren't just beauty fans anymore. They were people who felt seen by the mess I had survived. I was disowned when I came out. Started a dog grooming business with $200 and a pair of scissors, one message read. My mom tried to take credit for my Etsy shop. I'm so glad I'm not alone, said another. And then one that really gutted me, my dad sued me over a food truck I bought with my own savings. He said I wouldn't know how to run it without him. We haven't spoken in 5 years. Every time I read one, I felt a weird mix of comfort and grief. Because my story wasn't rare. It was just rarely told. People liked tidy stories. Rags to riches. Supportive parents. Overnight success. But real success, the kind you carve out of bone and grit, it's messy. It's bitter and beautiful all at once. And sometimes, it's lonely as hell. One night, Junie and I were on the roof of my apartment, sipping wine out of mismatched mugs and watching the stars smear across the sky like spilled ink. She turned to me and said, "You know, we should have named the company Spike Glow." I snorted. "You're terrible." "I'm serious. That would have sold like crazy." Imagine the product line: Petty Lip Tint, Vengeance Primer, Unbothered Blush. We laughed for a full minute, and then she got quiet. "Do you ever think they'll come around?" she asked softly. I paused, then shrugged. "No. And I don't think I need them anymore." It wasn't bitter. It was clear. There was a time when I would have given anything for their approval. When I kept every newsletter I was featured in, every article, every shelf photo, hoping they'd see it and maybe say, "We're proud of you." But now? Now I had customers who told me I changed their skin, their routine, even their confidence. I had a team who respected me. A partner in Junie who had been there when I had nothing. That meant more than any family approval ever could. Still, I won't lie, the loneliness crept in sometimes. Especially around holidays. I didn't go back to Chicago anymore. I spent Christmases in Santa Fe or LA, sometimes with friends, sometimes alone. Devin sent another email around the new year. Longer this time. More personal. I don't expect you to forgive me. But I hope one day we can sit down and talk. About anything. About nothing. I miss you. I didn't answer. Not because I hated him. But because I was still healing, and I needed that space to stay clean. Junie told me I was allowed to protect my peace. You can build a fence, she said. And still leave a door. Doesn't mean you have to open it right now. One random Wednesday in March, a woman walked into our Santa Fe studio. Early 60s, silver bob, expensive coat. I didn't recognize her. Are you the owner? She asked. I am, I replied. She smiled and said, I just wanted to see it for myself. Turns out, she was a former colleague of my mother's. They hadn't spoken in years. She'd seen our brand name in a local boutique and remembered the Marin name from conversations long ago. She used to say you were wasting your time, she said. Now look at you. It didn't sting. It didn't thrill me either. It just felt like confirmation. That I was no longer trying to prove anything. Just living it. And sometimes, that's enough. One day not long after that, I was going through some old boxes in storage, the ones I'd never fully unpacked after college. Inside one, I found a tiny plastic jar with a peeling label and crusted edges. The first ever Allegro sample. The formula was garbage. The pigment is too thick. But the name was there, scrawled in Sharpie. It stopped me cold. Because holding that little jar, I remembered everything, the ramen-fueled nights, the sticky Arizona heat, the laughter with Junie, the tears when orders didn't come, the thrill when they did. It wasn't just a product. It was mine. I kept that little jar. Put it on a shelf above my desk in the studio where I could see it every day. Not as a trophy. As a reminder. A reminder of who I was before the noise. Before the lawsuits. Before anyone tried to rewrite my story for their own gain. That dusty little plastic pot, it held more truth than any of their declarations ever had. A few months later, Junie and I were deep in planning for our spring line when she slammed her laptop shut with a little too much force. I have an idea, she said. And I think you're going to like it. That usually meant something chaotic. This time, it was brilliant. She wanted to launch a special edition campaign built around stories like mine, real, gritty, inspiring. Founders, artists, creatives who had been doubted, betrayed, underestimated. We called it the Unwritten Collection. Each shade would be named after things people told us we couldn't be. Too sensitive, a warm peach blush. Not a real job, a deep espresso eye pencil. Ungrateful daughter, a cool mauve lipstick. Needs an attitude adjustment, a fire red gloss with gold shimmer. Every single name was a phrase pulled directly from conversations we'd had with women who had been torn down by people they once trusted, family, partners, mentors. The campaign exploded. People got it. It wasn't about anger. It was about reclaiming the language used against us. Turning slaps into slogans. We offered anonymous story submissions, and the site was flooded within a week. Some made us laugh. Some made us cry. All of them reminded us that this brand was bigger than makeup now. It was a movement. Retailers came knocking. Magazines picked it up. Influencers cried on camera while applying ungrateful daughter. Even a former editor at a major beauty magazine posted a review with the caption, I've never related to a makeup line this deeply. I was the sensitive, ungrateful daughter. Now I own that crap. We sold out in 2 weeks. The local news picked it up. Then national. I got invited to speak at a women's entrepreneurship summit in New York. They asked me to talk about building a brand from the ground up, not just the success, but the betrayal, the lawsuit, the rebuilding. I stood on stage in a sleek black dress and said the words I had waited my entire life to say. I was told I owed my success to people who never believed in me. I built it anyway. Brick by brick. Jar by jar. And I didn't do it out of hate. I did it to survive. The applause was thunderous. And that, right there, was my revenge. But there was more. The final twist, the part that makes people smile when I tell it now, came quietly. 6 months after that speech, I received a letter in the mail. Not an email. Not a lawyer's letterhead. A handwritten envelope, addressed in my mother's unmistakable cursive. Inside was a birthday card, generic, store-bought, with a watercolor rose on the front. Inside it read, "We saw your feature in the Women's Journal. Your father says you look beautiful. I regret a lot of things. We both do. If you're open to it, we'd like to talk. No lawyers. Just us." Mom, there was no apology. No acknowledgement of what they had done. Just a vague regret wrapped in pleasantries. I didn't reply. Not then. Not for a long while. Instead, I did something different. I took that card and slipped it into a frame, next to the original Allegro sample jar. Above it, I pinned a note Junie had scribbled years ago in our dorm room: "If they don't clap when you win, they weren't in your corner when you were losing." That became my compass. But fate, it seems, has a flair for timing. 3 months later, Allegro Beauty was offered a pop-up spot in a boutique on the Magnificent Mile in Chicago. A week-long event, prime traffic, high visibility. I hesitated at first, it was home territory. But Junie convinced me. "It's not about going back," she said. "It's about showing up." So I did. We flew in. Set up the booth. Put up the story banners, the dorm photos, the early experiments, the messy beginnings. We even had a giant poster with our tagline, "From dorm room to department store, built, not given." I was there the first day. Quiet, in the corner, greeting customers, watching the crowd. That's when I saw them. My parents. Walking in, arm in arm, dressed like they were headed to church. My father looked older than I remembered. Thinner. My mother clutched her purse like she wasn't sure if she should be proud or afraid. They looked around the booth, reading the displays. I stood a few feet away, pretending to organize lipstick samples. My mother's eyes landed on the framed dorm photo of me and Junie, both of us in pajamas, holding up a lip gloss like we'd just invented sliced bread. She stared at it for a long time. Then, without saying a word, she turned to walk away. My father hesitated. He met my eyes. Nodded once. Then followed her. They didn't say a thing. Didn't ask to talk. Didn't demand anything. And for the first time in my life, I realized they had nothing left to take. No claims to file. No narratives to twist. No daughter to control. I had outgrown their version of me. And that, more than any courtroom win, was the truest revenge of all. I went back to the booth and smiled at a teenage girl trying on Too Sensitive. "It looks amazing on you," I said. She blushed. "Thanks. I thought I wasn't really a makeup person." I handed her a mirror. "You are now." And just like that, the cycle continued. From one daughter to another, unbroken. Unbought. Unapologetic.